by 2029 at a CAGR of 31%, thus reflecting a cumulative annual growth rate of 31%. The growth has been attributed to favorable government policies promoting digital economy initiatives. And according to a survey by the Retailers Association of India, the retail sales have grown 5% more in June 2024 compared to June 2023. Now, while the sales in the South region rose 7% and in the North region, sales have recorded a rise of over 5%. Meanwhile, Indian badminton player Satvik Sairaj Ranki Reddy has set a Guinness World Record for the fastest hit by a male player in badminton on court. Satvik recorded a mind-boggling speed of 565 kilometers per hour with his smash. The record was earlier held by Malaysian player Tan Boon Hyung, whose record was at 493 kilometers per hour. Let's move on, ladies and gentlemen, to an issue that happened earlier in the day and that should get us thinking. Are we ready to battle a cyber pandemic? What do you mean by a cyber pandemic? Just like disease hits all of humanity, today we are all connected and so dependent on technology that is perhaps linked to each other. If there is an outage which is mischievous, will we as Bharat be able to isolate or insulate ourselves? Our systems are restarting. A massive Microsoft outage unleashed havoc, ladies and gentlemen, unleashed havoc across systems across the world. Millions of Windows users across the globe still experiencing the blue screen of death, quote unquote, error, which is causing the system to suddenly shut down or reboot. Flights grounded, passengers stranded, banks and stock markets hit. Even 9/11 series in the US was hit. In some parts, payment systems and emergency services were affected. So what caused this global outage? Is Bharat ready to tackle a cyber pandemic? Is Bharat on track when it comes to dealing with a cyber attack and insulating all our own systems from perhaps a worldwide cyber attack or an outage? We'll talk about all of that, but first let us tell you what transpired earlier in the day. First, what triggered the infamous blue screen blues? CrowdStrike rolled out Falcon software update. The Falcon software is a tool to protect the system from cyber threats. The outage is linked to a bug in the CrowdStrike's Falcon software. The bug caused the systems to encounter blue screen death, quote unquote. There was global outage affecting every nation where Microsoft is primarily used for operations. Now, here are some of the places which were majorly impacted. The United States, with over 1,000 flights cancelled and more than 2,000 delayed within, into, or even out of the US. American Airlines, Delta Airlines, the United Airlines all resumed some flights after initial pauses, but disruptions continued. The Newark International Airport experienced significant IT outages, with United Airlines employees waiting by departure monitors displaying error screens. Emergency 911 services were disrupted in many parts of the USA, and non-emergency call centers were also not functioning. In Europe, disruptions reported by Lufthansa, KLM and the SAS Airlines. Switzerland, Zurich Airport halted landings. Hospitals, elective surgeries were cancelled in Germany. Doctors in the United Kingdom faced issues accessing their online booking systems. Pharmacists had disruptions with medicine deliveries and accessing prescriptions. Britain's Sky News and BBC's Children's TV network went off air. Sky News resumed with presenters reading from printed notes. The London Stock Exchange experienced disruptions in its regulatory news service, but trading remained unaffected. Australia, ABC News was unable to broadcast news following the system's failure. Banks, telecoms, media outlets and airlines reported large-scale technical outages. Australia's National Cybersecurity Coordinator reported widespread technical issues affecting various companies and services. Even Bharat was impacted by the meltdown. 56 flight cancellations and over 160 plus flights were delayed. Breakdown of e-check-in boarding systems was encountered at multiple airports. Carriers and airports shifted to manual check-ins, and those standard traditional printed boarding cards had handwritten boarding details given to people. Yes, and disruptions reported in accessing banking apps. Disruptions hit Office apps, Microsoft 365, Microsoft Teams and Azure. Disruptions were reported in accessing Instagram, Amazon and Gmail. Microsoft, meanwhile, has ruled out claims of any cyber attack and said that the process is on to fix it all, working on rerouting the impacted traffic to alternate systems, working to alleviate outages impact in a more expedient fashion, working to identify full impact, and will provide more information. CrowdStrike have said that the outage took place due to a recent update received in the product. It's not a security incident or a cyber attack, they very clearly said. Issue has been identified, isolated, and is being fixed. Actively working with customers impacted. Affected machines require manual intervention to resolve. That's what they're saying. Civil Aviation Minister has also issued directives to airlines, airports as flights were disrupted. The authorities have been directed to be compassionate. Ministry working to ensure swift travel. Manual backup systems are being implemented. Enhanced communication to be provided. Extra staff deployed to assist passengers. Amenities provision for passenger comfort. Coordinating with Microsoft for resolution is what the Civil Aviation Ministry said. On ground, what we witnessed was jugaad at its best. And people going back to the age-old handwritten methodology. That meant delays, that meant frustration, but eventually a lot of work got done. In fact, in the Delhi airport, the maximum delay for some of the flights was less than an hour compared to a lot of other disruptions across the world that we saw. We dealt with it perhaps in a far greater measure than some of the other nations which today are so dependent on technology, they cannot get into the analog or manual mode. But what if this was a cyber attack? What if this was done with a devious design to paralyze an entire nation technologically? Are we in a position like Russia, which used its Astra software because of the sanctions? They've got their own platforms and remained insulated because of this outage. Is that something that we need to have as a backup plan if there is a cyber pandemic? Many believe the future pandemic could be cyber. Mukesh Chaudhary, founder and CEO of CyberOps, joins us this evening. Muktesh Chandar, former IPS and cybersecurity expert, joins us. Mishi Chaudhary, technology lawyer, and Kanish Gaur, cybersecurity expert, also with us. Namaste. Thank you very, very much. Such a pleasure to have you all, and such great minds to speak on this. Let's try and go across to, I'm going to start with Mr. Muktesh Chandar. Sir, how would you see this? Do you believe this is somewhere a wake-up call to nations that we want one world, one tech, one platform, etc., but we need to have a backup plan? We need to be able to perhaps insulate ourselves as a nation from a cyber pandemic.
Thank you very much. First of all, this is not the first time that we are having a situation like this and a warning like this. In past, there have been some cases starting from 2010 Stuxnet and then 2017 NHS attack on UK health infrastructure. There have been several indicators that in a situation like this, when there is an attack, fortunately, this time it is not a cyber attack, but it's a malfunctioning of a third-party upgrade, but it has a global impact. And because of our dependence on a particular kind of software or a particular kind of hardware, the vulnerability increases. Now, there are two factors in this. One is the operating system. The other is the chips. And I'm very happy to say that in the past few years, there has been a recognition of this fact that we must have our own foundries and we also must have our own operating system where our dependence on high-tech joint and that too on a single particular vendor is decreased. I will like to give an example today of the CCTNS system or the police crime criminal and network tracking system, which is not on Windows, which is on a open source platform. And also the 112, All India 112 system, which has not been impacted, fortunately. So, but the problem is that how many companies will want to migrate to this kind of system because they are not so mature, because they are not so popular across the world, because of interoperability issues and in a global environment, dependence on a particular vendor becomes a necessity. Now, talking of the cybersecurity preparedness, We are very fortunate that our IT systems and policies and things are in place. The only thing which is remaining, in my opinion, is the cyber uh, security strategy. The cyber security strategy document is still not out. It is in the consideration phase, and I'm sure that the national cyber security strategy should also be brought out as soon, so that we are ready with a situation like this.
Ji. Mukesh Chaudhary, your thoughts? Are we very, very vulnerable as a nation that perhaps leads in technology services? Are we, are we as a nation ready to deal with it with something as severe as today, or perhaps something far more severe or far more devious?
So, as a nation, it is a matter of concern across the globe. It is not only for India, for other countries as well. Apart from this, I would like to say that the major organization or the critical infrastructure, they need a robust business continuity plan, because in such kind of scenarios and situations, they are continue to operate their services, how they are continue to provide their services to the customers and clients or the citizens of the country. So this is a major concern, and this is the exposure of various service provider also, that their business continuity plan is not robust, and the compliances that they are doing, they are not regularly compliant, and there are something on papers but not executable and not in practical. So this is also one of the exposure which like people have come to know, and the other service providers and the companies who have come to know about such things. Now, apart from this, I would like to say that even though CrowdStrike, or mostly people are blaming CrowdStrike for this, but it's shared responsibility by CrowdStrike as well as Microsoft, because
Microsoft.
a small update can disrupt all the operations. Microsoft is accountable for the same, and blue screen of death is not a concern wherein this has arisen right now. From past many years, Microsoft users are struggling with this blue screen of death. So this is one of a nightmare for any software engineer or a security professional who is or who is providing service or who is using Microsoft services. Blue screen of death is a matter of concern from almost a decade or more.
What's the solution? Before I go across to Mishi Chaudhary and Kanish Kaur, let me ask you, what is the solution? Do we as a nation, can we do it? See, today what we're trying to do is we're trying to create platforms for interface. One of the aspects is that you go to preferred platforms because they have their pass masters, they are also able to get you connectivity. Open source platform as an option is always there, but why do people prefer Microsoft? Or, Linux based systems or Microsoft based systems are something that many tend to lean towards. This interoperability, is that perhaps the only reason why? And is this a cost or a hazard that I have to be ready with, that one day all this can come crashing and I have to always, all I can do is have a backup plan?
See, definitely whatever operating service or service provider or operating system you are going to use, whether it is Linux or whether it is any Unix based or any DOS based system, but important is you should have a backup plan, you should have a business continuity plan which is robust. Because today it is Microsoft, tomorrow it can be any other operating system or any other server. So it doesn't matter. More of it is a matter of concern for the service providers to understand that if they are taking service from any of the service provider who are providing enterprise level service like Microsoft or any other service provider, let us consider like operating system like Red Hat, which is an enterprise level operating system, wherein they are also providing services to many of the companies and organizations.
Right.
It is a concern for them that if they are updating any, if they are taking updates from any software application or any service provider, will their entire kernel level operating system will get crashed? So this is the matter of concern more of for any operating, basically operating software or basically operating system. So for Microsoft, it is a very common problem wherein information security professionals, they can understand it very well. This is new. But here in this case, it is a global outage. That is why it is more alarming. And it has it has raised a trigger also for many of the cyber warfare kind of situations wherein someone can come up with such kind of update, or someone can disrupt entire operations of any country or any targeted country, or a mass level execution across the borders. And it has also I believe that this has also given a hint to the terror organizations that they can do a big disruption from such kind of attacks.
So how do we protect ourselves? Because that's one of the biggest first thoughts that came. If such an outage were to happen and it impacted perhaps the communications network of our defense systems, or the eyes and ears that keep our nation protected. It's an open window for the enemy territorially and also digitally or in the cyberspace, Mishi Chaudhary.
Thank you. I think whether it is India or other countries, we face persistent and increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns that threaten public sector, private sector, and ultimately the life of Indians' security and privacy. The idea that the central government must improve its efforts to identify, deter, protect against, detect and respond to these actions as well as actors is obviously being discussed quite a bit. Now, it also means that cyber security requires more than just government action, because protecting the nation from malicious cyber actors requires the government to partner with the private sector.
Right.
And the private sector also has to continuously adapt to the threat environment. Who are the threat actors here? I think what Mr. Muktesh Chandra made a very important point was about the reliance on open source software. This vendor lock-in, which we've talked about in a larger context, which is that Microsoft is a very powerful company. It is omnipresent. And if we all rely only on one kind of a company, one vendor, then when one thing goes wrong, it goes wrong everywhere. That is an important point to underline. I think Mukesh also talked about Red Hat. There are alternatives. And India is the only country which actually has an open source policy mandating the use of open source in various federal procurement things. But policies are only good, or if they're paper tigers, then if they're not enforced, they're just
Correct.
good on the paper itself. In the current part, the current problem is because of the tight integration of any kind of software, which will be like this current one on Falcon. I think for the ironic part is that in order to actually address threats and malware and things you are talking about, precisely these kind of software are required. That's what CrowdStrike sells. And because think of it as like an antivirus on steroids. So it has to be very tightly integrated with the systems. And Microsoft has a whole lot of other problems, but right now that's not the problem. And any other software, any other company, if they were also to be selling that, they would want a very tight integration, because that's how you monitor what the threats are. And something like that could happen. This part obviously would have an automatic update leading to such a thing could have perhaps been prevented. But this is thankfully not a cyber attack. But your larger question about what we need to do right now, what are we thinking about? It does tell us that government of India must think about it in a larger way. The Biden administration in 2021 came up with something to recognize that government can't do this alone. There has to be tighter, closer threat environment information which needs to be discussed. The private sector has to come in and discuss at a larger scale. And that's why open source becomes important. And I would really, really say that even now, after Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, they have become the friends of open source. So we are no longer talking about a Linux system which is of early aughts of the 90s, but right now a lot of it is run here. You saw that your home PCs were not impacted, but this kind of software is used by enterprises, will have to be used. And so removing barriers to sharing the threat information, considering zero trust as the environment, various other things will have to be done, and a comprehensive strategy where stakeholders are very clear, that needs to be done. I think it's good that certain at least took quick notice of it. They are working together about it, and they have issued what kind of information one requires from the government. But nobody can do this by themselves.
No, they can't do it by themselves, but how many are trained to go analog, or how many do have a serious business continuity plan, as Mukesh Chaudhary was talking about, Kanishk? Because there were many airports which just were staring at the screens because they didn't know how to go manual, how to go analog.
Well, if we see
I'm just going to bring in Kanishk here, Mishi, and then I'll come back to you. Yes, Kanishk.
Yes, at the nationwide level, we must look at having procedure for business continuity and disaster recovery. There is too much dependence on softwares today, and softwares are eating into our lives. How do we create that kill switch in case the softwares disrupt? We have a manual mechanism to ensure continuity of business. And these are issues that must be sorted. While we are talking about digital India, digital Bharat, talking about creating digital public infrastructure which is safe and secure and use open source. But at the same time, a parallel mechanism of ensuring continuity is the need of the hour, and a lot of countries are going and creating those mechanisms. Russia has created, even
Yes.
Ukraine has created those mechanisms, but so far in India, I don't think so. We have those mechanisms set up. We have not even conducted exercise. I recall the incident where we had a power outage across two grids, and the entire country went down. Now, those are the scenarios, right? If there is a software glitch in a company like CrowdStrike today, which is a major cybersecurity provider, how do we safeguard rest of the systems from complete failure is something that we need to discuss. We discuss on open source, but there has to be a larger framework to include more Indian OEMs also into this picture, because most of the cybersecurity companies which provide solutions to big corporate giants like Microsoft are either coming from US itself or are coming from Israel. Very few cybersecurity companies get that kind of ecosystem to build that global narrative, to build that global base. I think this is something which is the need of the hour. And as Anand, you have pointed out, we are becoming a state which wants to be Atmanirbhar. It's important we show that we are Atmanirbhar when it comes to creating software systems and products, and not just the services business, which we have been traditionally good in.
So if we can design our own UPI, if we can design our own CoWIN platform, if we can design our own Aadhaar platforms, and then create an interface where many different diverse and vast platforms can talk to each other, why can't we create an alternative system, especially for the critical services, which can go into the backup like the Russians did, Mukteshji? I'm just going to ask you this, see, because this is what the Russian press service actually said. They said that the global IT failure did not affect the operation at the Domodedovo airport in Moscow. The press service has said the airport is ready to offer others a backup check-in system, a Russia-made Astra. Russian airlines have long switched to the domestic check-in system, so the global failure did not affect them. Now, do we need nations to be imposed with sanctions so that they develop their own tech?
First of all, I would like to mention about one agency. Somebody spoke about the CERT-in. There is one more agency to deal with the national critical information infrastructure in our country, that is NCIIPC under Section 70A of IT Act. Now, in this organization, the responsibility of safeguarding the IT infrastructure of critical sector, which includes aviation, which includes power, IT, banking, finance, and others, is also on NCIIPC. Now, a lot of things were done while I was the director of NCIIPC long back. But I think this organization also has to shape up like any other Western country where the systems are in place. I have seen Korean system, I have seen UK systems. So this agency must develop mechanism and infrastructure, as mentioned by Mishi, so that we are able to deal with such kind of disaster. The second point is developing our own IT systems and softwares, like our engineers have been doing it, software engineers have been doing it for world companies. But why can't we do it for ourselves in our own country? I think it's a matter of policy and also a boost required by the government, that Atmanirbhar, as Kanishk has been saying. We started with Bharat operating system long back.
Yes.
But it didn't take off. And as of now, I'm not even aware who is using it and how it is being used. But that was a very ambitious project started long back, and by now we should have completed that so that our dependence on uh, uh, a big tech giant
Or a
is
foreign tech,
reduced.
yeah, is reduced.
Foreign tech. And as I mentioned earlier, that in police networking system, this was a very crucial decision which was taken at that time that we'll go for Ubuntu or open source Linux based system. So wherever such criticality is there, as Kanish was mentioning, and also Mukesh was mentioning the BCP for disaster management. What parallel system can we not reboot our systems on for example, in this situation, or the blue screen of death came. Now reboot your system on Ubuntu and start working.
Yeah.
Was it possible? Are there dual bootable machines installed? Are people
No,
aware that this can be
are,
done?
are we even thinking on those lines is the larger question, Muktesh ji and Mukesh Chaudhary. The worry is that this was for a few hours, and look at the disruption it caused. What if
And
this would
also this will
what if this were to run into even 2 or 3 days? Look at the damage it would cause to economy, it would cause to major businesses, airlines, lifestyle, livelihood. The whole collective loss itself would be so huge in terms of
and
yeah.
what if it was a coordinated attack by some state sponsored actors, or state themselves,
Correct. So
who are inimical to a particular country?
that is exactly what Mukesh was also saying, that there are many people who would have got ideas. They may have got ideas and say, okay, let's piggyback on the provider itself rather than trying to hack their systems, whatever is supposed to protect the system. If we plant a bug there, then we're gone. It's going to give ideas to a lot of people. So are we even thinking on those lines? And how soon do we need to think, and how long before we are able to create an infrastructure that can insulate us as a people? Because we are also huge in number.
You are absolutely right.
Mukesh ji, sorry, Mukesh ji, yeah.
Ah, please go on.
Sir, so basically, as I was mentioning earlier, that as Muktesh ji also was saying correctly, that if we have a backup plan, if we have a business continuity plan with us, like as I earlier mentioned, then they would have reboot the system and they would have initiated providing services through some another server or parallel server. This could have been easily done if they have practiced that earlier. But they never planned this, that this could ever happen, that all the operations will get disrupted, and they were not ready for it. So this is a classic example for almost all the countries or multiple countries who has got this disruption in their services, and they are not able to provide the services to the customers or the citizens. Now here, business continuity plans at times in many organizations, like we also provide cybersecurity audits and compliance to the organizations. So at times, there are certain companies who will just say that we just need to put these policies on paper and we are not going to, okay, but just give us some policies. So on papers, they are good to go, but practically they are not ready to execute it. So this they need to understand here, or in India, I will say, because I don't know much about other countries, how they are taking up. But depending on country to country or organization to organization, there are organizations who feel this as an extra cost or extra burden on their organization, that why to put extra cost in this? And why put extra cost for this particular compliance? And reverse, it is a responsibility for organizations like Microsoft or other service providers, that in how short time period they are going to give them the solution. Okay, what will be the response time? They don't talk much when they are going to sign any agreement or a deal. Response is very much needed in such kind of scenarios. And what will be the mode of communication? What will be the method of communication? Because in certain kind of scenario, if they'll say that you can approach us on this email ID, on that particular email ID, there will be email bombing. 20 lakh will be shooted in some next couple of seconds or minutes.
Correct.
So they will not be able to respond to them.
No, you're making a point, because now CrowdStrike has said that this can be corrected only through manual intervention. So across how many desktops, how many systems, how many organizations, how many airlines, how many airports will there be manual intervention to try and correct this? So what's happened, the damage that's been caused over a few hours or just by one wrong code could take days to actually correct, and see that disrupts so many economies and so many nations and so many businesses who would have not factored this in. I'm running out of time, but quickly, Mishi, I just want to ask you, can nations bring legislations, governments bring legislations to ensure that this kind of a cyber security and a business continuity plan is mandated?
So I am the general counsel of a cybersecurity company. We provide data protection products. I think at least in the United States, when we enter into contracts, there is a service level agreement which we do provide. In the contracts, we do provide business continuity plans also, which
Right.
is a document which helps people operating to plan for such a disaster. So, although, of course, and on the upfront right now, this is going on, we are trying to solve the problem. IT admins will be spending their weekend trying to help solve this problem, first manually, and then, of course, how various systems work. However, underlying this, who shares the cost, who is responsible for all of it, and the discussions that would open, they're already built into the law as well as the contract, at least in the United States.
Right.
To answer the question, yes, countries can bring up. India does have a DPD people, which talks about data protection and a bunch of other things. But overarching cybersecurity policy, or what Mr. Mukesh has been talking about as well, that the fact that the compliance is generally seen as a cost center. Oh, now I have to spend money, and why don't I just check boxes for the sake of it? They only come into actually foreground when such a disaster happens, because you're like, oh, I wrote a policy, I never bothered to actually implement it. I didn't do a tabletop exercise to see what if something like that happened, who's going to do what exactly.
Correct.
So that is why, yes, legislation can be brought. Legislation exists in many countries already. India, it does not exist. That's why people tend to take it lightly that this has to be done. And that's why my earlier point about is that the central government works with the private companies. You come up with the legislation, you make it a requirement for such matters. And that's why when you will go to buy something, that vendor will have to write it in their contract. What does the service level agreement says? How long will be the downtime? How much credit you will get then? And it already exists in many countries. It should be there in
India.
well,
And if
we
can make GST compliance mandatory and companies can follow it, why can't we make a business continuity and a cyber security compliance or a doctrine to be mandatory and to be followed by all nations, all companies, especially those which are enterprise level, which are mass interface, and which can be at critical levels. If they are hampered, then it can actually cause a breakdown in the functioning of society as a whole, be it critical services or otherwise. Very, very fair point. Thank you very much to the lady and the gentleman for a very engaging conversation and a much needed conversation. We're going to take a very short break here on The Right Stand. When we come back, we turn the spotlight on the United Kingdom. The entire immigration hotbed, Leeds, went up in flames, ladies and gentlemen. It started with a child care issue with a small community and a group, but then exploded into something totally different. And one of the British MPs has given a very, very glaring open hint. We get you the report from ground. Sanjay Suri, live with us from Leeds when we come back. Stay with us. Violence erupted in Leeds in the United Kingdom as rioters set ablaze a bus, overturned a police vehicle and even pelted stones at cops. The chaos began after social services removed 4 children from a reportedly Romanian family after the 5th child, a young infant, was reportedly seen with head injuries. So they removed the other children and took them into government aided childcare. Eyewitnesses said that some of the people from the community responded by setting fires and throwing stones, but then it just snowballed into something far more diabolical and dangerous. And you can see this, and they say that it is not just a micro community. This region in Leeds is home to immigrants, especially a lot of them from the subcontinent, Pakistan and some of the other nations in South Asia. And the larger question is, did this all have a certain color? Because the hint towards a micro community was made, but then thereafter we had some British MPs come out and say that it has got a snowballing or a spillover of subcontinental politics. Are they linked to a particular nation? That's the big question. But as the violence ensued, British politician Nigel Farage claimed that politics of the subcontinent is to be blamed. He said, and I quote him, that politics of the subcontinent are currently playing out on the streets of Leeds. Let's understand from Sanjay Suri that what's the true story. Did others piggyback on an issue that a family from a micro community, reportedly Romanian, had, and did that then snowball into somebody else co-opting it for venting out themselves on the streets of the United Kingdom in Leeds?
To an extent, without doubt, Anand, because as you were reporting, this began with an issue with a Romanian family, and the official word is that it started as a family matter, and there was an immediate protest from the Romanian community. And we have to bear in mind that the Roma that this lot originally is, and they've come from Romania primarily, is a community that is in a good deal of trouble and controversy all around Europe, and they have a hard time of it wherever they go. But really the heart of the issue is without doubt immigration. That led the
Sanjay, we've just suddenly lost your audio. From the source itself, we seem to have lost your audio. So from the part where you said that Roma and this community is infamous all across Europe, we lost your audio. We've got it back. Please continue.
Yes, I wouldn't say infamous, I would say they are controversial. And also as an immigrant community, they have a hard time of it just about everywhere. And in this instance, when you had the 4 children taken away by the social security, in the immediate instance, we had a lot of people from the Roma community, Romanians as well, who gathered around to protest. But that didn't quite explain the extent of the violence we saw and how long it continued, much through the night. This is also, this Hare Hill area is home to a very large immigrant community. A lot that you were quite rightly saying is from the subcontinent. A fairly high number of Bangladeshis and Pakistanis in this area, and a number of them also joined in. They have issues of their own. One common to other migrants, this is an area of deprivation, but also there is a wider and a more and a deeper underlying political issue, and there has been a lot of unrest within the community here over Labour Party's Gaza policy. They say that Labour and the Labour government has not condemned Israel as strongly as they would like to see it condemned, and that reflected in a significant vote away from Labour in the elections that we've just seen. So there is a good deal of political anger that also is underlying in this community, and to an extent there was a spillover of that as well.
Was there a Bangladeshi reference to this? Was there a Bangladeshi angle to this entire thing? Because there are some who have also said the subcontinent. Why would the Indian subcontinent be mentioned by people like Nigel Farage? There are others who have reportedly said that there was Bangladeshi ire or angst because of what's happening in Dhaka and in Bangladesh, and that spilled over into the streets of Leeds.
Well, Nigel Farage, of course, is a member of parliament whose views need to be taken in a certain context. He is right of right wing, so he sort of fired his message from the hip, saying it was subcontinental. But no doubt there is a significant population here from the subcontinent, and that does include a fair number of Bangladeshis as well. Whether there was a domestic spillover from the Bangladesh issues and the events that we are witnessing there is not very clear. It does seem to be a part of a wider Muslim unhappiness with the Labour Party and the Labour government over its Gaza policy that seemed to explain some of the anger that we have seen on the streets here that was joined by others than the Roma and the Romanians.
What is the extent of damage behind you? I know you've got a busy day at hand, a lot of ground to cover, but how extensive is the damage?
Well, we've just seen here the burnt out remains of the double-decker being cleared away. They've just brought a crane in and they've sort of piled up the remains onto a truck to take it away. They are now engaged in cleaning the place and trying to erase traces of this violence. But of course, the erasure is not going to be as complete in people's minds and in their experiences, because this has been very unsettling to the entire community here. And their best hope is that it should be a wake-up call for the authorities to take some steps to correct the imbalance in opportunities and income that is loaded very heavily against people here.
Now the immigrant issue comes up again, and what's on display should also set the alarm bells ringing at different levels. Sanjay Suri, thank you very much. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Joining us now, Pandit Satish Sharma and Adit Kothari, a founding member of the Indic Society. My namaste to you gentlemen. Connecting after a while. Good to see you on the right stand. How would you analyze what's played out, Pandit Satish Sharma?
Namaskar, Ji Anand, indeed. A pleasure to connect with you after such a long time. I have a slightly different read to what your previous contributor mentioned. Firstly, this red herring about deprivation. I've heard it so many times, but there are many communities in this country who are living in equally deprived conditions, and they do not resort to such criminality on the flimsiest of reasons. So although that is a regular card that's played, I don't think that it's actually a genuine, authentic one. But there is a deeper problem. Firstly, I think we should be clear, these were not communal riots. So let's put that to one side. Many commentators have been indicating that, but these were not communal. But there is a darker and a deeper trend that is now emerging. If you have a think back to a few years ago when the BLM movement came into the United Kingdom, what we saw was the allegations of violence and criminality in another country triggering extraordinary levels of criminality in this country. We saw it with the BLM movement. We've seen it with the Khalistanis and their allegations in Punjab. We have seen it with many other pseudo claims. We have seen it most recently with Gaza. But what we are seeing is the appropriation of some sort of a claim and then using that to justify criminality. And that is a deeply worrying thing. The problem for the Labour Party is that they gathered all of these various disparate groups together and said, come to us, come into our fold, and we will represent you. And in many cases, what's happened now is that the energy of hatred has become too close to the surface. And once you start to leverage hatred and violence for political gain, it's something has been released from Pandora's box. And we are seeing that it's going to be very, very difficult to put back into the Pandora's box. The other worry, you've mentioned Bangladesh over in East London. We have now exactly the same toolkit being played out. Claims of violence in a different nation, translating into acts of criminality on the streets of London. That's the larger problem that the British police force and the authorities have to deal with. It's almost as though we're approaching, or the United Kingdom is approaching its Shaheen Bagh moment. You know, a tenuous complaint, but ramped up civil disorder. The other problem to this particular phenomenon is two-tier policing. The indigenous community are becoming unbelievably worried that there is now openly and undisputably two-tier policing going on. There's a level of discrimination. It's almost as though that famous principle that lady jurisprudence is blindfolded so that she can apply law without fear or favor. That blindfold is now, it's been lifted, so that in the case of certain communities who are very expert at leveraging victimhood in order to inflict criminality, suddenly the application of the law is different. We saw this in Leicester only in 2022. There are so many acts, there are so many provisions in law which the authorities could leverage to respond to this level of criminality, but they only respond very firmly with the indigenous community. And this is, I think, going to be the bigger problem for us.
Adit, your thoughts? You agree, disagree with Pandit Satish Sharma?
It's going to be really tough for me to disagree with Panditji. I mean, it's after he's actually spoken, there is also very little that remains for anybody else to actually contribute. So I'm going to try my best to try.
First, I have first movers advantage.
Absolutely.
As they say.
But Anandji, like Panditji essentially pointed out, the two-tier policing system, that is something brazenly admissible. So I was speaking to a friend earlier today, and he mentioned to me that had this been football hooligans, causing this sort of a anarchy, this sort of a feral and ferocious anarchy on the streets of London or anywhere in the United Kingdom, you would have immediately seen the riot police come down. That is what not happened in Leeds. Which is what I think all of us need to be cognizant of, because somewhere or the other, the hostage politics is being played up really well by the so-called immigrants. And I'm an immigrant into this country, and I have absolutely nothing against immigration. What I have against is the two-tier kind of immigration policy that Britain essentially demonstrates, where you essentially have one set of immigrants who come through the correct checks and balances, who go through all of the procedures, and then you have the other ones who come through, I would say dodgy means, and then, they essentially take the system to hostage. They hate everything that British society, civil society stands for. They have a strong disdain for police. They have a strong disdain for law and order, and that is what we are seeing. We saw the Roma family, where the children were essentially taken away by the social services. That was the tinderbox to the anarchy. But what came down after that was a complete mishmash of all ethnic communities coming into the streets of Leeds and playing foul against the system, against the police themselves, causing immense riot on the streets and civil disorder on the streets of Leeds.
You talked about two-tier immigration, and Pandit Satish Sharma spoke about two-tier policing. What is two-tier policing? Just expand a little on that. Why would you say that's happening? Because this has been mentioned even in reports. This has been mentioned even by locals, and there is some shock that's been seen also from the policymakers and those in government at the display, the violent display that's been seen on the streets. This is anarchy. So that's one part of the question. The second part is, do you have reasons to believe that this could not perhaps be spontaneous? Is there a certain loose organization to what was manifest? Adit and then Pandit Satish Sharma. So you go first this time, Adit.
Thanks. So I think from a two-tier policing system, I think we're very clear. Like I mentioned, if there were football hooligans who were creating some sort of chaos in the streets of the United Kingdom, the riot police would have been there and would have been taking control. The right to police and the right to violence has to remain with the state. It cannot be dispersed to the hands of the civilians, which is what is happening in Leeds, or which is what we saw in the case of Leicester in 2022, which is where our community has a massive problem with. We tried to raise this up with the polity, with the academia, with the intelligentsia in Britain, but nobody came out to listen to us, and that is what I think Panditji tried to outline as well.
Right.
So that's the two-tier policing aspect of it. Sorry, I missed out the second question, Anandji.
Do you have reasons to believe that this may not all have been spontaneous? Is there a loose organizing to this anarchy?
I don't think there's loose organization or any sort of orchestrating to this anarchy. I think it was pretty spontaneous from that perspective. There is a lot of angst. There is a lot of frustration with the British polity within certain diasporas and certain ethnicities in Britain with regards to what politics is being played out in the Middle East, for example. And that is somewhere the fault of the British polity as well, because the subcontinental politics or the politics of Israel and Gaza should not become the politics of Britain. British civilians and the British politicians need to focus on British polity and British issues largely. I mean, there are, some of the issues may just spill over, but it doesn't reprimand this sort of a action which we see outside Trafalgar Square or which we see outside the Israeli embassy, etc., etc. So that is where I think that is a pure failure of the British polity. Anand ji.
Pandit Satish Sharma.
Gee, if I can add, something Sanjay ji said was that Nigel Farage, who is deemed to be right of right, I think that's actually being proven to be a trope. He has been on the nail, he has been right on too many occasions. His finger is very much on the pulse, but in this case, I think his interpretation is actually shallow. It's not the politics of the subcontinent. What we are seeing is a two-tier policing system, and the two tiers are simply this. There are groups of people who agree to policing by consent. They agree that they are participants in this society. They are contributing to the well-being of everybody in this society. And then there's a second group who, on the basis of their actions, don't seem to have any allegiance to this nation, to this society, and to the indigenous people of these islands. They seem to dance to the tune of priorities and values and brotherhoods, which are pan-national. They are not the actions of people in this country. These responses, the immediate leap to be able to light fires, to roll police cars over, this is totally alien to this society. It's a shock, and we are just seeing across the water in Ireland exactly the same two-tier policing now being put forward. We have seen people such as Nigel Farage are now becoming mainstream because they are with the pulse of the public. We're going to see Tommy Robinson becoming even more mainstream.
But these instances have been witnessed all around the United Kingdom, all across Europe. It was there in France to be witnessed. It was there in Sweden. It's there in Denmark. There are so many other nations where this has happened. And has UK thought that it will not happen there on their streets? Or even last year, Leicester, were there no lessons learned? And if there are increasingly many who believe that there is two-tier policing and this is something which is going to be a bane and it's going to hurt society, British society, something needs to be done. But then perhaps Europe is waking up to some hard realities. What they used to talk about, watching in the distance across on another continent, it's all coming very, very closer home to them. That's what's happening.
Definitely.
Pandit Satish Sharma and Adit Kothari, always a pleasure speaking with you, gents. Thank you very, very much. Namaste.
Jai Shri Ram ji.
With that, it's a wrap of this edition of The Right Stand. Brass Tacks up next. Stay with us. Namaste.
CNN News 18 and Federal Bank Primetime Studio.
A very good evening. You're watching Brass Tacks with me, Akanksha Swaroop, and we are coming live to you from the CNN News 18 and Federal Bank Primetime Studios. Now, a political face-off has erupted over the Kawad Yatra in Uttar Pradesh. This after the state administration ordered eateries and hotels along the Yatra path to display their names of the owners to respect the sentiments and dietary preferences of devotees and to avoid religious disputes. After facing flack from the opposition, which has accused the Uttar Pradesh government of state-sponsored bigotry against the Muslim community today, the Chief Minister's office has now announced that the order will be in place across the entire state to maintain the purity of the yatra. In fact, even Haridwar in Uttarakhand is now